Eruption of Mount Tambora. In April 1815, a volcano named Mount Tambora on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa erupted with unimaginable force. It was the most powerful volcanic eruption ever recorded in human history. Before the disaster, Tambora had been quiet for centuries, its magma chamber slowly building up pressure deep underground. In 1812, people began hearing strange rumbles and seeing dark smoke. Then, on April 5, 1815, the volcano roared to life. Explosions grew louder each day until, on the evening of April 10th, Tambora unleashed its full fury. The sky turned black as immense clouds of ash and gas billowed into the upper atmosphere. The roar of the explosions echoed across oceans, and ash blanketed lands far beyond the islands. Rivers of searing gas and rock, known as pyroclastic flows, thundered down the slopes, annihilating villages and forests. Massive waves struck nearby coasts. Tens of thousands perished, some immediately, others from the starvation and disease that followed when crops and livestock were destroyed. So much ash and sulfur choked the air that sunlight dimmed across the globe. The next year, 1816, went down in history as the year without a summer. Temperatures dropped just enough to destroy harvests. Snow fell in June in America. China suffered floods and hunger, and riots erupted over bread in Europe. Even painters noticed the change. William Turner's canvases glowed with the strange orange skies as high levels of volcanic fragments in the atmosphere caused a haze to hang over the sky for several years after the eruption and created rich red hues in sunsets. Scientists now estimate Tambora's eruption released energy on a scale of dozens of gigatons of TNT. The Carrington event. In early September 1859, the Sun sent out a massive burst of energy that slammed into Earth, causing the strongest magnetic storm ever recorded. It was so powerful that skies around the world lit up with glowing colours, brighter than anything people had ever seen. Days before, on September 1st, two British astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson, spotted a sudden bright flash on the Sun, the first solar flare ever recorded. Hours later, that flare released a coronal mass ejection, a giant bubble of charged particles that raced toward Earth. Normally, such solar blasts take days to arrive, but this one reached us in less than 18 hours. Scientists think a smaller solar storm days earlier had cleared the way, letting this one hit at full force. When it struck, Earth's magnetic field went wild. The night sky glowed red, green, and purple, even near the equator. People in Mexico, Cuba, Japan, and Australia could see it. In the US, the aurora was so bright that miners got up early to make breakfast, thinking it was dawn. Newspapers reported that you could read outside by its light. Telegraph systems across Europe and North America sparked, shocked operators, and even caught fire. Wires threw off flames, and messages were sent without batteries, powered only by the storm itself. It was the first time humans realized that what happens on the Sun can directly affect life on Earth. If a storm like the Carrington event happened today, it could cause massive power outages, damage satellites, and disrupt global communications. Studies estimate the cost in the US alone could reach $600 billion to over $2 trillion. The Bonilla Comet. In August 1883, a Mexican astronomer named José Bonilla made one of the most mysterious and possibly most terrifying astronomical observations in history. From his observatory in Zacatecas, Mexico, Bonilla was studying the Sun through his telescope when he noticed something strange. Dozens of dark, fuzzy objects kept crossing in front of the Sun's glowing disk. Intrigued, he photographed what he saw over the next 2 days, capturing 447 images of hundreds of shapes that seemed to fly past the Sun in clusters. At first, no one could explain what Bonilla had seen. When his report appeared in the French astronomy journal L'Astronomie in 1886, even famous astronomer Camille Flammarion suggested they might have been birds, dust, or insects near the telescope lens. Others dismissed the whole thing as a trick of light. But over a century later, In 2011, scientists from the National Autonomous University of Mexico revisited Bonilla's data and came to a far more dramatic conclusion. He had likely witnessed a comet breaking apart, and thousands of its fragments had narrowly missed Earth. According to their calculations, these icy fragments were passing only 400 miles, 640 kilometers, above Earth's surface. Astronomically speaking, a near miss. Each fragment ranged in size from a house to a mountain, and even a single impact could have matched the 1908 Tunguska explosion in Siberia. An estimated 3,000 fragments passed by Earth that day. Had the comet hit, it might have triggered thousands of impacts within 2 days, sparking global fires, tsunamis, and possibly a mass extinction. The Spanish flu. In 1918, as World War I was coming to an end, another invisible enemy struck, a deadly strain of influenza that spread across the globe. Within a year, it infected about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, and killed an estimated 50 million. It was one of the deadliest disasters in human history, killing more people in a single year than the Black Death had in a century. The pandemic began quietly in the spring of 1918, when an army cook named Albert Gitchell fell ill at Camp Funston, Kansas. Within days, hundreds of soldiers were infected, and soon the virus was traveling with troops across the United States and into Europe. That first wave, nicknamed the 3-day fever, seemed mild. Most victims recovered quickly, and few died. But it had already spread silently across continents. By the autumn of 1918, the flu returned, stronger, faster, and far more lethal. This second wave was devastating. Victims sometimes died within hours of feeling sick, their lungs filling with fluid until they could no longer breathe. Entire military camps were paralyzed. The disease struck healthy young adults the hardest, the very people who were normally strongest. It spread everywhere, from bustling cities to remote Alaskan villages. Hospitals overflowed, and with so many doctors and nurses serving in the war, care was scarce. By the end of 1918, the average life expectancy in the United States had dropped by 12 years. Around the world, entire communities vanished. In the end, the virus caused more deaths than the Great War itself. Cuban Missile Crisis. In October 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union faced off in what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, a tense standoff over Soviet nuclear missiles secretly placed in Cuba. Many historians believe October 27, 1962, or Black Saturday, was the closest the world ever came to a nuclear war. That day, an American spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Another went missing over Siberia, and US warships were hunting Soviet submarines near the island. One of those subs, B-59, carried a nuclear torpedo, a weapon powerful enough to start World War III. Surrounded by US destroyers dropping practice depth charges to force it to surface, the B-59's crew was exhausted, overheated, and terrified. The submarine had been trapped underwater for days, running low on air and power, with temperatures inside reaching 65 degrees Celsius, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. When it finally surfaced late that night, blinding lights and loud explosions from nearby American planes and ships left the crew disoriented and panicked. Believing they were under attack and that war had already begun, the submarine's commander, Captain Valentin Savitsky, shouted for an emergency dive and ordered the nuclear torpedo to be made ready. If he had launched it, it could have triggered all-out nuclear war. But another officer on board, Vasily Arkhipov, noticed that the Americans were signaling, not firing. He calmly stopped Savitsky, convincing him to wait and signal back. That decision saved the world from disaster. Later, even Arkhipov admitted they survived, mainly because of luck. At the same time, confusion spread on land and in the air. US military leaders didn't know a spy plane over the Arctic was lost, or that Soviet commanders in Cuba had already shot down another one without orders. Some US fighter jets even took off armed with nuclear missiles without their superiors realizing it. In the end, President John F. Kennedy chose diplomacy over force. The Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba, and the US quietly withdrew its missiles from Turkey. 1983. False alarm. On the night of September 26, 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov was on duty in a secret bunker near Moscow, monitoring the Soviet Union's early warning satellites for signs of a US nuclear attack. The Cold War was at its tensest point. Both superpowers were armed with thousands of nuclear weapons, each ready to launch within minutes. Just after midnight, alarms began to blare. The system showed that the United States had launched 5 nuclear missiles toward the Soviet Union. Sirens screamed, lights flashed, and Petrov's screen demanded one action: report the attack, which would almost certainly trigger a massive Soviet counterstrike. Petrov hesitated. Something didn't feel right. A real US first strike would involve hundreds, not just a handful, and Soviet ground radar showed no incoming warheads. He had to make a choice: follow protocol and risk starting World War III, or trust his instincts and do nothing. Petrov decided the system was wrong. He reported it as a false alarm and waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. He had been right. Later, investigators learned that the satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off clouds for missile launches. Petrov's calm judgment had prevented a nuclear retaliation that could have destroyed the world. For years, his actions remained classified. When the story finally came out in the 1990s, Stanislav Petrov was quietly hailed as the man who saved the world.